firstly, thank you for Andre for his talk and thoughts that he's left us with. As we ponder that and put it into practice, let's also ask God's help in that. Now, Graham Postuma he's from the NDC, chairman of, and there's a handout in your folder that he'll be running through, so you'll be able to refer to that. I'll hand over to you, Graham.
Well, good morning everyone. I am Graham Postuma. I am the original Graham Postuma. The other one's a mini-me. I'm currently serving, I'm an elder in the Reformed Church of Pukekohe, but today I'm here as in capacity as chairman of the National Diaconate. Just out of interest, who's serving as a deacon for the very first time? Hot diggity dog. Who's done 2 terms? Two or 3? Who's a lifer? Who's done forever? Derek? Yeah? There's a lot of newbies. Who's never heard of the National Diaconate Committee? Well, that's a good start. Good start. I'll go through the page first and then I'll do some separate notes after that. I did this intro. I thought we were going to get a stack of handouts, and I feel a bit embarrassed that, maybe, but this is the only one. So I will read through this with you so that I know that you've actually read it, because I know what you guys are like. You've got this bit of paper and you're going to file it away and nothing's ever going to happen, and you'll be none the wiser. So we as a committee, we're appointed by Synod and we're based in Auckland, and we're charged to manage diaconal work on behalf of the denomination. And while every congregation has its own deacons charged to be involved in ministry of mercy locally, the NDC deals with issues that involve all of our churches, and our focus is primarily international rather than local. Our official mandate is found in the Office Bearer's Handbook. Who's seen that? Anybody not seen who's not seen the handbook? Get one. Really. One wag has pointed out that if you want to keep a secret, put it in the church newsletter or denominational handbook. And make sure it'll never ever get read. So please help fight this disease and read the stuff you should be reading. And seriously, with that list of books that we were showing this morning, grab some of those titles and actually start reading. We've really got to take our role seriously. I was a deacon for about 12 years, and I think sometimes you get a bit, you're pretty proud that you picked to be a deacon. And you can honestly just probably coast through your role and just do the bare minimum. You can just collect the money Sunday by Sunday. But I think you've got to take it a lot more serious than that. At the end of the day, you will be held accountable for how you've done your work. You're doing this work for the honour and glory of the Lord. So you read what you can, learn what you can, do as much as you can, and really take your role seriously. To a certain degree, I'm sort of disappointed. I'm really rapt that we've got a crowd like this, but it could have been twice as big. Seriously, eh? It could have been twice as big. We're not well represented. We're not as well represented as we possibly could have been, Deacons often ask us, what do we do? And the mandate states that the purpose of the NDC is to extend diaconal aid and relief into areas beyond local aid rendered by the deacons of individual churches of the RCNZ. Aid and relief shall normally be extended to overseas causes by the RCNZ. But there's more. The NDC's main or primary focus is on long-term community-based development programs, which may include medical, agricultural, education and construction projects. We prioritise church-based word and deed ministries, and there's that scenario, we've heard it all morning. So word and deed, they both go together. If possible, run by the local deacons and a local Reformed, and if not available, evangelical churches. And where there are no local churches, or where the project is beyond the scope of a local church or churches, we cooperate with relief agencies, but we do much prefer Reformed. And then we've got our focus. Our focus at this point of time is mainly the following ongoing projects. And Pastor Dirk and Stephen will, and John, actually, our committee, we've got a number of committees. So John O'Tamar from Hukanui, Stephen is also on the NDC, myself and Pastor Dirk are here also as representatives of the NDC, and they will talk further about the Henry Murray School, what's going on in Bangalore, India, access, and of course there's swim. Compassionate catalogue. It's compassionate catalogue. Who's never seen a compassionate catalogue? It's, we'll talk about that here at this point. We've been doing it now for 3 years. This past financial year that it went out at Christmas time, we raised probably about $21,000 through that compassionate catalogue. Previous year we did about $37,000. A lot of that was really because of a very big donation from Hukanui. Every year, I mean, most of you through your junk mail, you'll get a similar type of book, maybe through from World Vision or Tear Fund. So this has been a good opportunity for our Reformed churches to use this very similar catalogue based on the same principles, that you can pick a project and give some money towards. So it's no different than the World Vision or Tear Fund type of books, except that probably 96% of the money that you give is actually going to get to that particular project. The actual cost of running the compassionate catalogue is minuscule in relation to what's, and that is the only cost, is really in printing the books and posting them around the country. So all the money that is collected through that catalogue goes to the actual projects. Now what's, I suppose, disappointing for this last year was we had about 9 churches that didn't participate at all, and I personally just found that a bit disappointing. That's for various reasons, and that's entirely up to yourselves as to why or why not you didn't want to participate. But I would really encourage you that, I mean, with the amount of cost to the NDC, it is something that we have decided that we will continue to go on with. Now, what we've also done is, in the compassionate catalogue for this, the one that we've just done, is we actually included a number of New Zealand specific projects that are precious to us. So we've got a few projects that we included in the Solomons. So the likes of Susan Larson can be cared for, and Yair and Loretta, and now the Laguses in their work. So, you know, while the book's printed in Australia and primarily run out of Australia, we've been able to very much include some of our own work to give it very much a personal touch. So, and for the amount of work that it actually costs the deacons, I mean, literally it's a matter of just handing out the book to the congregation and promoting it for 4 weeks and see what happens. So if you decide to just bin them and sit on them and not actually even hand them out, I think you're actually doing a bit of a disservice to your members, because I'm continually surprised, particularly with the seniors. They just love, I mean, and some of them, you know, have got a couple of dollars. They just love giving to that type of work, that they can see it, touch it, feel it, and give to it.
Was there a reason why they arrived so late? We several of our older folk asked for them early in December, and we didn't receive until near the end of the second week in December. And so, it really should come out in the second week in November, so that we can hand it, we can promote them through our bulletin.
Yeah,
It was very late last year, and that's why we had a lot of people not funded, because
yeah.
the catalogue was so late, and they thought it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, you're not the only one. We've had a couple that, I mean, we'll talk about things like postal addresses and stuff too, because basically we just use the yearbook for postal addresses, and Bert Copers sends them from Australia because it seemed to be the most economical way to send them. So the majority of congregations did receive them in very early December, late November. Some didn't get them until January when they went and checked their PO boxes. And I had a couple of emails from congregations saying, like, we haven't got them, what do we do? And I said, well, I just said, let it fly, just do it. And if we don't get your money, I mean, we've only just got the money in now, 4 or 5 months down the track. So there was no reason why it couldn't have happened anyway, you know, if you so desired, you know.
In connection with that, I would consider to disconnect it from Christmas, so it's not a guilt offering that you encourage people to give, but a genuine offering. Because in my case, anything that comes around Christmas that asks for money, it goes in the bin without really everything, because it's all focused on, you know, you're so wealthy. Please feel guilty.
Yeah.
Do it mid-year.
With that though, as Graham said, the church can choose to run it end of January if they want to. You know, we've got to be careful that we're not receiving money through the whole year. But if the deacons decide, it's not so much when, you know, the deacons decide to do it after the Christmas. But the problem was that some churches, from what feedback is, weren't doing anything with it, and that was more the concern.
Yeah.
Date out of the catalogue. I'm pretty sure there's a date. Was a date.
There's always a year on it, just a year. Yeah, and we've just deliberately just released it at Christmas as a Christmas type of thing. I mean, most churches have a Christmas Day appeal. You know, if you've got a church service on Christmas Day, normally that would be, you know, again for the National Diaconate, you know, often. So we do have Christmas Day appeals. So yeah, it's just the time we released it. So I mean, I would really encourage you that, hey, when it's going to come out again at the end of this year. You know it's going to come out. I suppose what sort of, again, surprises me often is the deacons are not talking. I'm trying to be as proactive as I can in promoting stuff, but I'm still getting guys almost acting with shock, horror, surprise. I didn't know this was happening. I didn't know you had a mid-year appeal. I didn't know we had a Christmas appeal. So there's just seemed to be a lot, you know, just with a lot of newbies, which we do have today. I'll just try and be a little bit more proactive in promoting what we're doing. And now that you've actually got this sheet in front of you, hey, stick it in your deacons folder and refer to it, you know. Funding for the NDC is by means of 2 offerings per year, as recommended by our synod. There is our Christmas appeal, and there is also a mid-year appeal. So we just ask for 2 collections every year, and these are synodically approved. We don't have a quota system like, you know, like the OMB or many other of the things within our churches. It is purely on a free will offering that we can work, do the work that we do. So please, again, I just encourage you just to really promote these. Within your churches, special collections, I mean, like in Pukekohe, the way that we do it is every Lord's Supper Sunday, we'll have 2 collections. So maybe 6 times a year or whatever, 8 times a year, 6 times a year, we have a special collection. Is it pretty much similar, just a show of hands, is that the way you do it? Or is it just random hit and miss, just when you feel in the mood? Every month you'll do a special? Yeah. Yeah. So you do have a system of doing special collections. So, hey, at the beginning of the year, when you get together as deacons and maybe do your roster for special collections, hey, give us one in the middle of the year sometime, and give us one at the end of the year for Christmas. And then you can fill in the rest of the gaps. Like I said, this is a synodically approved, and it just helps us to fund the work that we do. So like it says in the notes here, support via these means, although we expect it, it's not always provided. Note well that the deacons are expected to ensure that these two offerings are taken annually. Our committee does not receive an income via quota, and therefore we cannot function without regular contributions. Another funding source has been the Compassionate Catalogue. Emergency relief. There are times when a national, like Christchurch earthquakes, or international emergency, tsunamis, floods, earthquakes, fills the headlines. And this is a highly emotive ministry, often fueled by extensive media coverage. However, emergency relief, while important, is not the primary focus of the NDC. Both the mandate and our experience as a committee highlight the importance of this principle. Media coverage generally ensures that government and other agencies respond very quickly with very large amounts of aid for disaster victims, while the needs that the NDC support receive little while the needs that the NDC support receive little publicity or help. So our committee will, if deemed good and wise, call for the administration of special offerings and locate churches or organisations which meet RCNZ criteria for an acceptable distribution channels to which funds can be directed. So generally we are not an emergency relief organisation. And again, if there's something going on in America, you know that every night you're going to see that particular event on TV. If there's an event in Australia, flooding or whatever, and Christchurch, it was day after day after day after day on the news. You see it in your face all the time. And of course, in all those places, New Zealand, Australia, America, all those developed countries have got government assistance, there's insurance, and the like. So, in many of those cases, they don't actually need our assistance. They don't need our help. And what help that we do give them, our $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, is like a drop in the ocean. So a lot of those developed countries have got infrastructure in place that, quite honestly, like it says here, it's a bit emotive. But I mean, what does concern us is places like India and Pakistan. I mean, you might get a snippet. There was a major flood in Pakistan. The other night, a factory collapsed in Bangladesh, I think. A few hundred people killed. You probably will never ever hear of that event again. It was a once-a, it'll be out of our minds and gone. Those countries don't have insurance. They don't have WINS, and they don't have unemployment benefits. So that's the sort of, if we're going to do relief work, that is the sort of stuff that we'd rather be involved in, and we have been done so in the past. And so our primary focus has never been emergency relief. But if we do get involved, I would certainly like to prefer to be in the places where it really is needed and required. Contacting the committee, it's as simple as checking the denominational yearbook. Publicity. Numerous articles have been written by the NDC in Faith in Focus. Who's ever read Faith in Focus? Oh, serious. Come on, guys. I hardly ever used to read Faith in Focus. But there is some good stuff in there, and we have put some really neat articles. And as newbie deacons, you've got to start making the time and reading stuff that is really relevant to what you are doing in your ministry. And you can read old articles, you can trace them back via the website. Another source of information is the Acts of Synod. Every synod receives an extensive report on the work that we do. So every synodical year, a full report is given on money in, money out, and what we've done and achieved in our term. And we've also been developing smaller articles suitable for the local bulletins. And if you need more, and often I'll get an email from somebody mid-year saying, look, we're going to have a special collection. What's it for? Have you got any material that we can bung in our bulletin or put up on a projector that we can promote? And the same at Christmas time. If you need special information, flick me an email, and we'll get whatever we can through to you to promote special collections and the work that we're doing. It doesn't change that much, but if you need some fresh stuff, give us a call. Administration, a plea. Receiving the proceeds of offerings can sometimes be a year-long, rather painful process. And I'm serious. We can have a mid-year appeal, and we'll get the funds for that maybe in January, February the following year. And it'll turn up randomly, and we think it's the Christmas appeal that's just been. But no, it was the mid-year from the year before. So, as deacons again, your responsibility, if you take up the collection, ensure that your treasurer sends the funds through promptly. You know, if you have a collection on Sunday, you've got the funds, treasurer banks it, ensure that in the next week or two that the treasurer sends a cheque off or transfers the funds across to the NDC, and just possibly put a markup with what it is for. Because honestly, yeah, we're just getting random sums coming through at random times that we don't know what they're actually for. And so yeah, just make it your business to check that payments are made promptly. Instruct your treasurer, or make it a point to tell us who the offerings are for. That's about it. Have you got a question? Yes?
Are your contact details on the RCNZ website?
Yeah.
Should.
Don't have a yearbook? Anybody ever seen a yearbook? Who's in your... Yeah, I'll grab you the details, but it should be Clark at RCNZ, NDCD. Yeah. With your deacons, if there's 2 or 3 deacons within the congregation, I'm assuming that there'd be one sort of person in charge or something, maybe. There's got to be a leader deacon. When I send out an email bomb, I just send it off to all the deacons, RCNZ, and I'll get half a dozen back, just don't exist. So what I do now is I send it to the deacons and I send it to the church clerks, hoping that you guys actually get to see my correspondence, So as a deacon, you should be registered with the church through the church website, and your email address should automatically, if I email bomb the deacons, you should receive all diaconal emails to your address.
The Deacons one actually has been fixed. I emailed to ask because we had the same with the conference, and I've been assured that every deacon's address, if it's deacons at Bishopdale or deacons at Devondale, it does go to a specific person. So it should be fixed. You should only need to send it to deacons at RCNZ.
Yeah. I've never trusted it for years. And I'm going, are people receiving this stuff, you know? So and in the early days, I'd even send it to the ministers just to wind them up. And I just, so they'd at least pass it on to the deacons, you know, because it was very, very frustrating. So please just do ensure that your deacons or the deacons, all your names are registered in that. Dirk.
Wouldn't it be marvellous if deacons made it a habit of acknowledging that they have received something?
You just click send receipt
Yeah.
on your email, and you click receipt, the recipient clicks yes, and it sends an email back automatically.
Jeremy, sort it for me.
It's not me, it's everybody else.
No, it's just straight over the... Send, step, receive, make an appointment.
You just secretary will do it. And you say something,
Jeremy, sort it. Yeah.
Just, I guess, by way of maybe being a little bit more, and I don't mean it's offensively proactively from the NDC, maybe they could just look out something with an updated slideshow presentation to the candidates. It may be just an update on what the year's work is, or just a bit of, and that one, just with a slide presentation in front of us. Oh, yeah, sweet, the year, bang it in, flick it up. Election goes and comes back.
Can do.
But we've done that a couple of times last year. I sent out 2 or 3 lots last year. Seen anything? Yeah, no, I don't mind. I mean,
No,
no,
in terms of slide presentations or
not slide. Yeah, it wouldn't have been slides, but we've sent out just stuff.
I think one of the things though that, we talk about in NBC is that all of these offerings, the mid-year, the end of year, and I'll put passionate aside for a second, though it's important, are synodical. They are things that the churches have decided. And what's frustrating is when you get replies, no, we're not doing it. We don't want to do it. Our church doesn't, no, we disagree. It's frustrating. As churches, Reformed Churches of New Zealand, we decided that these are what we're doing. Now, if your church then decides, no, we're not going to do it, well, it's very frustrating just getting an email, we don't do that anymore. Well, I mean, speaking for Graham, when he's sitting at the meetings, he's sitting there, I'm sending out requests saying why, giving reasons, and then when a church goes, no, we don't want to do it anymore, it's a synodical thing. It's something we say we are doing. So if you really aren't doing it, to me, in some ways, you're going against what the churches are saying. Now, I'm not saying, NDC is not going to take you up before synodical and say, look, put them up on the stage, they have it. But maybe we should. I mean, we could send, as the NDC, we see who gives, who doesn't. Now, it's sometimes we're looking at that list going, should we publish who does and who doesn't give? Not emails, but name and shame. Is that what it's going to, but what I'm saying is we can't understand why some churches are saying no. Now, compassionate could be looked as an extra, could be, if your church really says we don't like it. But it's a brilliant cause, and the whole thing is churches that look at the compassion as an extra, you should still hand it off. Because some members, if one member out of your entire church does a compassionate catalogue, we're not complaining. That's not the job. The compassionate is for that. It's worked really well though, and I think that, as I said, it's been individualised for our Reformed Church in New Zealand. It's something we have to do. So, just hammer that home.
Just statistically, brothers, mid-year will go between 60 and 70% of the churches are responding, in spite of repeated calls by the synod that these are offerings. Now, we don't have prescribed offerings, but your contribution to OMB, for example, is painless because whether you like it or not, you're going to pay it. It's done by a quota.
It's not painless.
But it's a bit like a tax.
And now, somewhere along the line, the bigger organisation, it becomes the NDC, because here, we're not appealing
Anything else? Yes.
Much feedback from the Harry Murray School? What's the feedback going?
Yeah, we have finally, end of last year, we got some good feedback, and again, we shared that with you too. So we sent up quite a bit of information at the end of last year because we were fortunate, well actually Dirk will spend more time on that, but there was actually a family from Bucklands Beach Church were from that area and actually visited, and we passed all that information on just prior to Christmas to the churches.
There's a really good one sent out the year before.
Yeah,
Something the Reading School does.
yeah.
We might have to resend everything.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, if we have been making a real effort over the last couple of years, especially to be more proactive. I mean, it came out of the last conference we had in Avondale. That was one of the complaints that we, you as deacons weren't hearing much from us. So we've been making a real effort, and it still seems like we're hitting a bit of a block. So yeah, stuff is being sent, and we're making an effort.
Just ask a question, what's your tax status?
Tax.
Tax status in regard to charities? And I noticed like the Compassionate Catalogue as an example.
Yeah.
It was trying to circumvent, well, to enable the giver to receive the tax rebate benefit by giving to your church, but the money was being sort of like funded to go overseas, which from my understanding doesn't actually qualify for the tax rebate.
Right. So yeah, we're not the catalogue itself.
Catalogue itself, but apart from that, the NDC, do you have any
No.
status, charity?
I'm well aware of REL sitting here, so
I'll cover that.
because I think there are some qualifications on that.
Yeah, I'll cover that on the next page.
Cool.
Stephen mentioned before about naming and shaming those churches that don't give to the prescribed collections. I can remember when the committee was in Christchurch, we actually did that, and it actually brought good results. Because they didn't like the fellow church, outdoing them. And yeah, I was actually on that committee when it was down here, so I know that it actually worked. So I would encourage you to actually look at that.
Mm.
We've done it to the local churches. If they haven't sent, we send them a reminder. But in one ear.
But Derek, we here, we are responsible before God in the first place,
Absolutely.
and not before one another. So naming and shaming and
I'm
that
not
I was
suggesting
saying,
that.
no, I'm not telling to you, but I'm only looking at you, sorry. I'm looking at all the others. We are responsible before the Lord, and whether we give or not, it is before Him. And whether we encourage the congregation, we have to encourage the congregation. That is our role as deacons. That is our role. But what the individuals do, they do it before God, and not before their brother or their deacon that taps them on the shoulder. And we have to give, and we have to be generous with a glad heart, and not because, otherwise Silver Street might think that Dovedale is a stingy church or something like that.
That's a compassionate catalogue. But I'm saying that when our synod, as a synod, decides on 2 annual offerings for national diaconate, we have an obligation to fulfil that. Now, at the last synod, we actually used the word, can you prescribe? In other words, make it absolutely, and again, the principle that operates is the one you mentioned, Ayan, that we would expect that all the churches would cooperate, and therefore, Reformed Churches of New Zealand have said we're not going to go into a list of prescribed offerings, or prescribed, but we expect them nevertheless. That's been the call of synod. So, individual giving, absolutely. But when it comes to these 2 offerings, we have corporately, before one another and the Lord, made a commitment to pay that.
May I add something else?
Sure.
For 3 years or so in Dovedale, we have changed our style of presenting special offerings. past, we would say there is an offering for the National Diaconate, and that will be twice. This is our mid-year offering for the National Diaconate next week. So we get all the coins and quarters, and maybe a gold coin of $2 worth out of the pockets of the people. What's been happening the last few years is a week or 2 weeks in advance, an article would be placed in our bulletin, an email would go out. If there was a slide presentation, that would go out. Some people would read through the whole slide presentation, others would not look at it at all, but they would look at the bulletin. So there is a much more active approach by the deacons, and that has and that's really paying off. If you look at the offerings, it might be only 20% of the people giving. You still get all the coins, but there might be 1 or 2 or 3 that have a cause really on their heart, and buy a new car for a missionary, for instance, or buy a laptop for a missionary, for instance, or yeah, but use the modern media and provide information. That would be my point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point. As deacons, it's your responsibility to promote these things. So, I mean, in Pukekohe, they've seemed to have had a good margin, and very similar to what you're obviously doing is promotion in the bulletin. And then the week before, the deacons always do the offertory prayer in the mornings. So the week before the special collection, after they've taken up the collection, they'll do a 2-minute blurb on what we're doing next weekend as a special collection, what it's all about, what it's for, and pray for that collection also, you know. So I think as deacons, yeah, be proactive in promoting. Jeremy?
Another point on that as well is, also, although they're sort of, like you said, rather than getting those change, we're actually getting substantial, monetary things because they've had a week to think about it. But we've also had from the congregation come to us and say, we really appreciate the fact that we're actually been told what we're supporting, rather than the half an hour before, or the morning they attend the church. Okay, we've got a special offering. What are we actually going to contribute to? And now that they've had the chance to know the week, or even the bullet goes in those bulletin 2 weeks before, so that they've not only a chance to sort of look how much money they can give, but they've also had the chance for that 2 weeks to pray for that mission as well. So that's what they've come to us and said, look, I really appreciate what you're doing now. It's nice to be informed. It's not so much the money that's going in, but the fact that they can actually pray for it, which is probably even more powerful.
How would you get on to get in your email list as we've got new deacons and that here? Do we have to chase you up, or does somebody tell you? How do you get on that list, and how often is it updated?
Email the webmaster in RCNZ. Just tell them the new deacon is so and so. Here's the new email address we look forward to. Yeah, because he doesn't know, he's in Dunedin. He doesn't know what happens in Pukekohe or anywhere else. He just relies on the information coming back.
Every time someone's voted in, don't do it annually. Every time someone's voted in, any time during the year, send it, that information. So a lot of churches just do it at the end of each year, but you might have a turnover of 2 or 3 during the year of elders or deacons. So just as soon as someone's voted in, and send that to the webmaster.
Yeah.
There's something that we did in our church just to help in the pockets of it. Everybody's got an envelope system and number. We suggest that people, if they're giving donations to NDC and whatever, to also put their envelope number on the envelope, on the door offering, so it gets recorded, and that helps contribute to their tax receipt. But then we also challenge the people to tithe their rebate that they get back. Some people might get a rebate of a couple of grand. They say, like, think about tithing or rebate. The Lord speaks you back with this money. Put that tithe back into the mission as well.
It's a novel idea, isn't it?
Yeah, we said for the budget, we're going to roll it out this year. We've talked about it for a year. We're going to roll it out this year, that we're actually going to tithe the church budget as well. And people are looking at that are horrified because that could be like $9 grand. Oh, where's that money going to come from? Well, hey, it's a tithe. So everything that we contribute towards mission, be it the local deacons work or NDC or OMB, we do
So as a general rule, is everyone doing it by the collection bag, or are special collections being done electronically as well?
Yeah, with us as well.
Both. Yeah. Is that
Likewise with us.
Bishop?
With electronic, it is hard though, because problem with electronic and taxing that is someone's got to keep a close tab on it, and if they're doing an electronic AP of 100, and then they say take it out of that, what are they changing to that annual AP to 120 for that week or whatever? It's very hard. Getting the information off that is very unclear. That's the only problem with doing it through automatic payments. So generally the cassette bag works better.
Did, just in closing, did everybody understand their travel reimbursing stuff? Does everybody know how that system works? Okay, so because this is a synodically approved conference, we're supposed to do this every 3 years. Synod said that every church will send 2 deacons, and a synod will reimburse 2 deacons for their not too extravagant airfare costs. It's just Dutch. So you're not allowed to take first class on a Learjet to get to your conference, but don't take Jetstar either because you want to actually get there. So the system is that obviously with deacons who have travelled, who have flown here, keep your dockets or receipts if you haven't done so already, and they get sent to Alice Sartoff, and she's the synodical treasurer person, and she should reimburse you, your congregation, for the 2 flights. Clear? Cool.
So how that works, it'll be up to you to send it to Alice Sartoff. It won't be up to me, and it won't be up to Graham here. So if you want reimbursement, you'll have to send it.
You know the address?
It's in the yearbook.
We've got a website too.
And it is on the website.
Send it to
Yeah.
sartoffamily@gmail.com.
There we are. It's his mum. Thanks for that, Graham. We were going to have some book reviews, but we're running a bit behind, so we'll do that later on. And we'll welcome Ari Gierlofs, who's an ex-tax inspector, so watch what you say now. And he'll be talking on administration, and you've got that handout in your folder that you can take back. So dig it out now and he'll run through that. And it's very handy to have this as you go back to your churches, so you can apply it and tidy up your accounting process if you need to. I've known Ari for quite a few years now, and I'm sure that he will really make it informative for each of us. And yeah, I'll leave it to you, Ari.
Thank you, Derek. And it's a privilege to be here. In terms of my background, you might say, well, what background does Ari have to be talking on this particular subject? I've just recently taken retirement from Inland Revenue after 37 years, and during that time I not only was an investigator with Inland Revenue and an investigations manager, but I also worked in policy advice, national office for some years, managing a division in there, and had the privilege of working with ministers of the Crown and Government. But then in my final 15 years or so in Christchurch, managed the legal division of Inland Revenue for South Island, and got to see some of the more difficult areas, the dispute areas, and when things turned to custard. And believe me, even with churches and non-profit organisations, things turn to custard. So it's with that background in mind and the fact that I've been not only a deacon but on committees of management for on and off for years too, that I bring that perspective. I've been a member of 4 different congregations, so I've seen a few things in terms of the way congregations, committee of management and sessions operate, and field quite a number of phone calls during the year. The Gearloss phone line is reasonably busy in terms of deacons and church treasurers who ring wanting advice on various bits and pieces. I'm not always happy with the advice they get, and the odd time I've been caught in a firefight between congregation members and committee of management on a particular issue too, and that's the part I don't really appreciate, when I get caught up in the crossfire, and I generally decline to get involved in that situation. They can sort their own stuff out. But just turning to the paper and just some comments I'll make as I take you through that, and I've just used a number of headings and I'll speak to that. In terms of your church treasurer, should be a good bookkeeper, not somebody who volunteers, but should be a good bookkeeper with an eye for detail. The requirements with the Charities Commission, nowadays sets of accounts need to be furnished on a regular basis. As I said to a number of people at the break and also last night, from where I sit and where I've been involved, I see some movement in the on the part of regulatory bodies in terms of the requirements of not-for-profit organisations. And that move is for greater accountability, greater transparency, and that's not just churches. So you've got the Charities Commission, you've got the successor to MED, which is the Ministry of Economic Development. I think they now call themselves Ministry of Business and Innovation, or with a couple of other words tucked in there as well. And I've seen some proposals floated that that would indicate that they want greater regulation and more accountability, and they want to be assured that churches and not-for-profit organisations are working to their incorporation document or their trust deed, and where they don't, there will be trouble. I see a move to a situation, and it's only a proposal at this point, so it hasn't happened yet by way of regulation, where organisations, not-for-profit organisations with a turnover of more than a certain threshold will be required to have their accounts audited by a qualified accountant. Hasn't happened yet, but it's been talked about. It may happen. We've got a minister, Minister Peter Dunn, United Party. He helps hold the balance of power, so he has worked with both sides of the political fence. He's not national, he's worked with Labour as well, and being a revenue minister there. And he looks jealously at areas where he could garner some revenue, and government at the moment needs revenue. So therefore out of that came the idea for FBT on car parks in Wellington and Auckland. Now that didn't get very far, but the suggestions has also been made more than once that FBT on motor vehicles for not-for-profit organisations may be lifted, the exemption there. So that may happen. You may have a situation going forward in the future where not-for-profit organisations, there's greater scrutiny of not-for-profit organisations than those found not to be sticking to their incorporation document might find there's a tax impost. So just beware that there's just a move to greater regulation, and if government could corner some of that revenue, I'm sure they'd be keen to do so. So we need to be beyond reproach. We need to make sure that our processes are rock solid. Now, moving on further on the question of treasurer, should be punctual, should meet deadlines, and because of the various compliance obligations that carry penalties if things aren't met in time, they should be keeping a close eye on what needs to be delivered when and how. Your church auditors. Now, in days of old, and I'm sure in some congregations it hasn't changed, there's a bit of a scramble round at the end of the year as congregations and sessions look for church auditors, and who's going to do it this year, and we can't ask so-and-so, they did it last year. Auditors should be ideally appointed a year ahead of time. Beginning of the financial year, which has just started, congregations should be thinking, who's going to be auditing the accounts next year, and have them in place. And generally it should be 2 auditors, not 1, but 2. Useful also for your treasurer, because there are times during the year when there might be an issue over how something is dealt with from an accounting perspective, or how something might be presented. And quite useful for your church treasurer be able to consult with the church auditors in terms of how comfortable they feel with a certain treatment of an issue. So it's useful for your church treasurer. It doesn't become such a lonely job if the auditors are already in place and it's somebody they can consult with. At the end of the day, your auditors have to be happy because they're signing off the final accounts of the church before they go to the AGM. And there may come a time when it's an absolute requirement in order for you to continue to be a registered charity. Now, the handling of money. And the handling of money is never always flash with not-for-profit organisations. There's plenty of publicity around where receipts have been accessed or stolen by people in positions of responsibility. And it wasn't so long ago there was some publicity around a senior figure in the Catholic churches who had his hand on the money, and that person was prosecuted and sent to jail. Some churches have insurance policies that cover stolen money, some don't. But if your processes in terms of how you handle the money are not rock solid, you could invalidate any claim if there is stolen money because you were just too sloppy about how you handled the money. Sloppy practices like not counting the money. Well, all right, not everybody counts the money on Sunday. I've heard deacons say we don't particularly want to do that. We want to be amongst the flock. We want to be talking to people to establish where the needs are, etc., etc. That is fine, accept that. But then you need to have a process where that money goes under lock and key, and the key is held by the different person than the person holding the money. So you haven't got one person who has the chain all the way and has access to the money without the others being present. I mean, you just need to have those processes. You need to have them tidy. And putting the receipts in the glove box of the car and driving around for 3 or 4 days until you meet to count the money is not acceptable, but it does happen. Believe me, it does happen. Money should be counted, as I said, as soon as practicable. If it cannot occur straight away after a service, it should be locked away before it's counted in the presence of 2 people, not 1 person, 2 people. After it is counted, a record should be kept or given to the church treasurer independent of the banking process. Now, I do hear of stories where the church treasurer is not advised of the offering figures until some time after, or the chitties are stockpiled and given to the church treasurer once every 3 months. So when there's a difference between the banking and the chitties, that you're trying to iron it out 3 months after the event. Not good enough. Got to tidy up the processes. Your church treasurer is an important cog. They need to be informed what the amount is, so that if it's different from the banking, it's picked up straight away and dealt with. It presents lots of opportunity. I'm not saying we have dishonest people in our denomination, but it presents opportunities when your processes aren't tight. Now, if your deacons' vocations are such where they don't go near a bank or past a bank on a regular basis and it takes till Thursday or Friday to bank the money, think about asking somebody else in the congregation to actually do the banking for you so it gets done on Monday or Tuesday. There should be a clear record of pledges and regular giving where the giver can be identified. And I pick up the point that Stephen made before, where with internet online banking nowadays, it's more of a problem. People, they think that they make a pledge or giving to a church, but don't put a name there, or there's no identifier. And I've heard of more than one deacon who's just trying to unwind that and sort it out. It really is a problem. And I think it needs to be something that you need to address at your church's annual general meeting. And I'll come back to another aspect of that in a minute. That where people take the convenient option of doing their church giving online, there are certain things they need to do. They need to identify themselves. When there's a special offering that they're giving to via that way, they need to also identify that, so that you make it easy for your church treasurer or your deacons, whoever's doing the recording. Those people are volunteers. They are doing that in their spare time. So it has to be made easy for them, and I think you need to be emphasising that with your congregations. There needs to be a clear audit trail. Anything less than an audit trail to the receipt you write to your congregation members is unacceptable. There have been practices in the past where churches couldn't be bothered keeping a spreadsheet of all the giving, and they relied on the congregation to tell them how much they'd given at the end of the year. Now, that is simply not acceptable, and you could find that if Inland Revenue actually scrutinised that, the donations received for that particular church might be disallowed. And funny as that may seem, though, that puts in jeopardy the whole denomination. So there has to be a clear audit trail. A number of our ethnic minority churches operate that way. And the difficulty we had as an Inland Revenue agency, and I was involved at one point some years ago in discussions on that, was that the total amount of receipts written was about triple or quadruple what actually got banked into the books. Because people, of course, told their treasurer the maximum. They wanted the donations rebate. They didn't give the maximum, not anything like it. Either that, or there was a lot of cash taken out of the bags on the way to the bank and used to pay staff in the churches, etc. So it is a problem. Inland Revenue is given its scrutiny, and I think we're probably beyond the risk area, but there has to be a clear audit trail. That's the point I'm making. It's got to be rock solid. Giving via the internet. It's a bit fraught. Many of our people are now picking up the option to do that because they don't keep checkbooks anymore. That's how they pay their bills. It's made church giving more public from the point of view of the giver, because names appear on bank statements. This has sent some church auditors and treasurers into a tailspin, and separate accounts and separate accounting systems have been set up to cope with this, to keep the names anonymous. The sad fact of that, though, it's doubled and sometimes trebled the work of keeping church books, because there's a whole separate bank account and separate set of accounts being kept. The difficulty is that, quite apart from the extra work it creates, it is also making the end-of-year accounts preparation much more of a headache. And you have some accounts that just don't form part of the church balance sheet because it's kept under a bushel in the hands of deacons. Now, often these systems have been designed to cope with the anonymity, but there are ways of dealing with that. And the ways of dealing with that is to set some protocols around who may see and who may not see the bank statements of the church, rather than having to create a whole separate accounting system. I mean, you have your committees of management as they meet. Often as not, the bank statements are there in a folder or whatever for people to peruse, and that doesn't have to be. If you've got adequate financial reporting coming from your treasurer, the other members of the committee of management don't have to see the bank statements as such. And you could put protocols in place that only the deacons and the treasurer actually see the bank statements, which does away with the need for a whole separate set of accounts, bank statements, etc., because it does create a lot of work. Now, at the end of the day, when various churches have done that, and some churches have spoken to me about it, it's generally about the requirement of the auditor. I think you need to also push back sometimes to your auditors and say, hear what you're saying, we'll put some protocols in place to deal with it, but we are not going to set up a whole separate set of bank accounts, because at the end of the day, the people who keep these accounts, they are volunteers. They are doing that after dinner at night, after they've worked, after they've had dinner with their wife and kids, etc., and taken their kids to Calvinettes and whatever, and cadets, and then they sit down and do their church books. You've got to be mindful of that as well. So you've got to be prepared to push back on that issue a wee bit, but I think you also need to tell your congregation that for the convenience of being able to do their giving online, there's a wee compromise there. You know, there is, it's just a wee bit more public than it used to be. And if people are uncomfortable with that, go back to the envelope system. Payment of accounts. Accounts should be paid in time, and sometimes our churches aren't so good about that. They take their time. They get thrown in a bin and dealt with at the end of the month or whatever. Often payments are made by cheque or direct debit. There will be a record. It should always be paid by cheque or direct debit rather than cash. It's not acceptable nowadays for cash to be taken out of the offering bag to pay accounts. And people might say, oh, it's only small accounts that we do. Yeah, but who's to know that it was only small accounts and it wasn't big accounts? I've not heard of problems in the Reformed churches, but once again, with some of our ethnic minority churches, big dollops of money are being taken out of the offering bag, and that's how the wages are being paid in some instances. And would you believe there's no record of wages paid for the purposes of tax and child support, or probably not child support, but student loan repayments, etc. It's right outside the tax system, and that's what makes it very, very wrong. Church treasurers complain that they have all and sundry coming to them with little bits of paper and such like, wanting payments for this and payments for that. You should also have a system in place that no money gets paid to anybody without producing a piece of paper, that is an invoice or a receipt, and you possibly also need to design some sort of pro forma invoice. There might be the odd, very special occasion when a receipt or an invoice was not available, and I would think if it's a group like Sunday school or the cadets or youth group that are wanting reimbursement and they haven't got a receipt or invoice, then get them to complete a pro forma little document, but get the chairperson of the group to sign that off rather than church treasurers having to deal with all and sundry. Put a process in place that makes these people accountable if they want money from the church. The other issue is dual sign-off. With payment of accounts by direct debit nowadays, it's one person pushing the button, whereas in the days when you used to write cheques for accounts, it used to be two people signing. Now, if you're going to continue with that, you need a process where the payments are reviewed, because once again, it gives rise to opportunity. And you need to be doing that not at the end of the year and relying on your auditors to do it. You need to be doing it monthly when you have your committee of management meetings and such like. Have a process whereby if one person, it is possible with banks nowadays to have a dual sign-off that your church treasurer is ready to pay accounts, but then it goes into a suspense account until a second person's had a look and pushes the button. You could have a process like that, which is the rock-solid way to go. Some churches won't like it because it will take too long, etc., too unwieldy. If you're not going to go that route, you certainly need to have a route whereby the payments made in the month are reviewed. And at the end of the day, it's a protection for the treasurer as much as it is for the church, in terms of there'll be no questions of somebody having their hand in the till. And I fear that in our churches, a lot of that has fallen by the wayside. There isn't that review, and it's a single button push by a single person. So just bear that in mind, folks. The annual general meeting, the importance of this meeting cannot be emphasised enough. It's not only important for the session and the clubs and the groups in the church, but it's an important part of the auditing process of your church accounts and responsibility for your church monies. It's the opportunity for your congregation to say, yeah, we're happy with the accounts. I would suggest that often as not, the accounts are a very incidental part of your AGM. I'm saying they need to play a more prominent part in your AGMs, and if I read the mood of where government and regulatory bodies are going. Once again, it's all a bit tight at the end of the financial year and such like, and there are deadlines to meet, auditors to get organised and such like. The point I'm making is the timing of the AGM, the presentation of the accounts, needs to be something that is an active conversation between the deacons, your church treasurer and your session as to what is possible and what is not possible in terms of timing. It's not a situation where session can come down and say, this is when we're going to hold the congregational meeting and please have everything ready, because at the end of the day, it also depends on the availability of your treasurer to prepare the accounts, the availability of your auditors. Because to go to an AGM or to go to send out your financial statements when they haven't been audited, or to go to an AGM saying, hey, they haven't been audited yet, but we don't expect any hassles, not good enough. Because at the end of the day, the congregation is not signing off a set of annual accounts if you haven't done that. And that's not tidy. And there might be a time in the future where you're asked to sign some declaration that your accounts have been signed off at the time that you furnish a return to the Charities Commission and such like. It hasn't happened yet, but it might happen. And if I sense the mood, it might happen in the future. So I think we need to do some tidying up there, folks. So, and as I said, the timing of those meetings needs to be one where there's that active conversation between your treasurer, your auditors, and your session in terms of the timing. So it fits for everybody, and it's tidy. Compliance obligations, most of them fall in the world of tax, although now we have the Charities Commission. The best course of action is to have a reminder system on a wall calendar and a diary, on a computer, the dates that PAYE, GST, FBT is due, and various other returns. Churches also need to be reminded, and it sounds a wee bit trite, but churches also need to be reminded that tax is levied for a reason. To gather necessary revenue for the government so they can build and maintain schools, roads, police force, public health system, etc., etc., and pay benefits to elderly and disadvantaged folk through WINS. So, accept taxes that are levied, do not indulge in practices that are dodgy. Now you might say, dodgy? How could that be possible? We're the Reformed Churches of New Zealand. I get the phone calls where all of the creative and innovative ideas are put to me now. If we did this, what? Or if we do that? And could we do this to our minister and it wouldn't affect us working for family tax credits? And make you cringe some of the suggestions that are made. Yeah, there's plenty of innovation in the Reformed churches. Don't be, yeah. Yeah, I know, but it doesn't feel quite so good when you're actually delivering a lecture on ethics to members of the same denomination over the phone. And it's generally not appreciated. And, I've been around too long not to do it. Now I do it. But, yeah, they not only bring you and your church into disrepute, but they're not a great advertisement for Christians. So let's just be careful there that we don't try to get too creative. So shot across the bow there, folks. Just let's be careful what we do. To be registered or not, lots of debate over that, and I think nearly all of our churches are registered for GST. Some are not, and perhaps for some that are not, and they've done their big building project, they might have missed the boat. The real benefits in being registered for GST, if you've got a big church extension project or a big capital injection of capital, or a project that involves an injection of capital, there is the opportunity to get the GST portion back if you're GST registered. It used to be 1/8 or 1/9, now it's 7/23. It ain't quite so neat, is it, in terms of the calculation. What is your taxable activity, or what taxable activity do you create? In many instances, it's either a bookstall or hall hire, the taxable activities that people have going as a justification for GST registration. There is an acceptance in government circles and inland revenue that whilst the taxable activity doesn't amount to much in terms of the turnover it generates, that they acquiesce, I suppose, rather than willingly, they acquiesce to not-for-profit organisations being GST registered and will refund happily. The advantage is if Bishopdale, for instance, has just completed a $1 million, $950,000 building project, and the GST portion of that is valuable. It's worth having. The difficulty is that at some point in the future, if you disband, or if you sell some of those capital assets and you're GST registered, you're having to account for output credits on the sale price, whether you paid GST at the time you purchased them or not. For instance, I think it was Masterton had me on the phone at one point where they had GST registered, and Homely, I think is the name of their old church, and the issue there was that they'd bought that before GST was even created. But because you're GST registered, when you sell it, you account for GST on there. That's just the way it works. That's the way it works in business. So, there is the advantages front up, but there's also a wee sting in the tail at the end, is what I'm saying in terms of GST. What else on GST? The timing of GST, just think about that, because with GST comes compliance obligations in terms of 2 monthly filing. You can move to a 6 monthly filing depending on the threshold and such like. But 6 monthly can catch you if you've got a big building project, for instance, and it's completed right at the beginning of the 6 month period, and then you've got to wait 6 months for your refund to come through. You can't flip-flop in terms of, hey, for the next GST period will only be 2 months, a 2 monthly cycle, Mr. Commissioner, because we need the money now. If you've opted for 6 months, it's 6 months. So you can be just thinking about that in terms of your timing. FBT or not. Churches being organisations that advance religion are exempt for FBT, sorry, not GST, just a wee correction there, FBT under section CX21 of the Income Tax Act. That does extend to church vehicles as well. That exemption does not, sorry, there's another wee typo there, I was doing this late at night, does not extend to the use of the vehicle for the trading arm of the church, e.g. You get the Salvation Army vehicles being used for the running of Goodwill stores. You get the Seventh-day Adventist Church and Sanitarium, which is their trading arm. So in those situations, even though there are not-for-profit organisations that advance religion, and they have charitable trust status and all that sort of stuff, FBT, to the extent that those vehicles are privately used or used outside of the workplace, is definitely payable. Churches running vehicles as churches at this point are not, but there are signals that that may be changing. So we just need to keep an eye on that, but yeah, there is a possibility that that might change. Salary sacrifice. That's probably the area most ripe for conversation, and it's the area that 90% of the phone calls I get is about salaries to ministers. Now, you need to be aware, and I imagine most of you would be, that the Church Extension Committee put out an annual newsletter which sets out guidelines for payments to ministers, and that's based on the Presbyterian scale, which is used as a guide. So there is an expectation that we not so much slavishly follow it, but at least be cognizant of it in terms of setting stipends for our ministers. Now, the general view around allowances is, from the revenue point of view, is that whilst they might be considered reimbursing, on the whole they are taxable. A general allowance to cover entertainment, clothing, books, etc., unless it reimburses something very specific, it's income. You can call it what you like, it's income, and it's taxable. But if you give your minister a specific allowance of $1,000 a year to purchase books and that, the expectation from the revenue is they could rock up any day, ask your minister to show the receipts. And if you can't, it ain't an allowance, folks. It's income. And the old days of a toga allowance for the ministers, gone. They don't wear togas. Clothing allowance, gone. I wear a suit to work. Well, don't anymore, but used to wear a suit to work. Minister wears a suit. It doesn't make it eligible for a clothing allowance. His clothing is no different than mine, or many of yours. So that's an area where it's got very grey and murky. It always does, until government has a tidy up again, and away we go again. Letters of call promising return trips, cash equivalents can be fraught with danger, and some churches do that now. You know, difficulty filling pulpits, so you make the letter of call a wee bit more juicy in terms of attracting ministers from North America or Canada or wherever. We'll do this and we'll do that. If you've promised it in a letter of call, big debate as to whether it's actually formally part of the salary package and taxable as opposed to non-taxable. So it's an area fraught with danger. Anything that can be converted to cash or is cash, it's taxable, no matter what you called it in a letter of call. But if a church, out of gratitude to a minister, says, hey, good deeds, minister, you've done well, we're going to shout you and your wife a trip to the US, and here's the tickets, that would not be taxable, because that is an unconditional gift. And that's okay. But if it's in the letter of call and it can be converted to a cash equivalent, that's just a bit harder. Not unusual for a minister to want to plan for his retirement, purchase his own home, or both. In that situation, because of the congregation doesn't have the impost of providing immense, the stipend is increased to reflect that state of affairs. As a consequence, the minister, and many of our ministers have larger families, lose a good chunk of their working for families' income. Tax credits. Minister buys his own house, he's got 8 kids. Well, all right, you bought your own house, we're going to pay you $200 more a week on top of the stipend than we used to, because you're providing the house. And the most frequent call I get from churches is, how can we do that without affecting his working for family tax credits? It's valuable, he's got 8 kids. And I said, you can't. End of story. The legislation intended that the case so do not try to be innovative and call the extra stipend something else to preserve the ministers working for family tax credits. I mean, in our situation, if our employer was paying us $250, $300 more a week, at the end of the day, we would get less working for families tax credit. So just compare it's an employment situation, and compare it with the man in the street. What would his situation be? Get too fancy here, it could be described as tax avoidance. And tax avoidance cops big penalties, and you could have situations where the promoter of that might come under more scrutiny than just having to pay penalties. I had a situation some years ago, a lot of years ago actually, where in the early days of GST, one of the congregations put a note in their bulletin saying, hey folks, as you pay your school fees, put it through the church treasurer and we'll arrange for the GST to be refunded, because the church is GST registered. That's tax avoidance. In fact, worse, it's fraud. And we stopped it in time, and the bulletin notice was hurriedly withdrawn. But there's nothing clearer. That's fraud. Churches have at times wished to make money available at cheaper rates to ministers to assist in the purchase of immense. Ordinarily, FBT would be payable on the balance between the interest rate charged and what would be chargeable in the marketplace. However, because churches are exempt from FBT, and that's the point I made before, there is no impact, and that's still the case. But of course, sessions need to convince their congregation that it's a good idea, and that's not always a given. So yeah, that's something that you've got to work through with your congregation. Donee status, and that's a question that came up before, I think from you, Gary. The New Zealand government encourages the tax-paying public to make donations to voluntary organisations, including churches, because it's a thing to do and because that reduces those organisations' dependence on the state. So at the end of the day, the state is quite happy for giving to donee organisations because it takes some of the pressure off government. And last year the cap was 2 years ago, the cap was taken off the limits on charitable donations. And of course, that gave rise to a whole new industry, receipt writing. As deacons and church treasurers, you need to ensure the receipts you write are backed up by the audit trail. I mentioned that before, and that's up to external scrutiny. Records need to be kept for 7 years. Donee status is something different from being registered with the Charities Commission. Donee status is an official list with Inland Revenue of organisations that Inland Revenue is happy to see receipts from in terms of giving people their donations rebates. It's a list maintained by ID of organisations that have donee status, whereas charitable means the organisation does not pay tax on its income, and those are the two differences. As a general rule, the fact that we are churches is sufficient to give us donee status, but the Reformed churches are there on the list anyway. Every now and then you might hear of a situation that ID donee status is granted on the basis that funds are expended in New Zealand only, and that's Gary's question. That is correct. The government is generally happy for people to make donations and to receive rebates on organisations that operate in New Zealand, because that is what's saving them revenue. They're not having to support those organisations. They are less happier about money going offshore. But donations rebates are granted for donations in New Zealand or to New Zealand organisations. There are some exceptions, and there's a list of external organisations that government is happy for donations to qualify. Those organisations, some of them are Tier Fund, Oxfam, World Vision, etc. But it's quite a defined list, and to get added to the list actually requires government to pass regulation. The question gets asked how any donations, for instance, to Heidi or any other organisation might be regarded. Most churches funnel it through their books and include the amounts in any receipt for charitable giving. ID would generally not disturb the situation so long as the funds sent overseas don't outweigh the funds used locally, and that's more convention than anything else. What we're saying is we're happy enough for the money to come through the churches, go to the national body and be dispersed, but in situations where the money coming into a church going offshore, hugely outweighs what is used locally, then Inland Revenue would have a problem. But by convention, if it doesn't outweigh and it's a small part of the church's budget, IRD are comfortable and are happy not to disturb the situation, because it would probably cost them more in effort and administration than the revenue gained. So, Gary, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, but at the same time you did say, we should be without stain.
Yes, but by wanting to be without stain, we're actually going to cause a lot of administration for an organisation that probably doesn't want to be too bothered about it either. So by convention, it's a bit like the GST registered or not as well. I mean, the GST registered a bookstall, hall hire. There's not a lot of revenue involved. There's a lot of revenue outflow in terms of the GST refunds that the charitable organisations do receive. So there are certain things that not-for-profit organisations have gained the benefit of over the years by convention more than anything else.
The other one that does it is RTC.
RTC. Now RTC, I had a meeting with our local RTC reps some time ago, because RTC at one point were, and certainly in South Island, when I was New Zealand, RTC were calling the donations, the subscription receipt a donation receipt. It's not. RTC is not.
I just attended a board, RTC board meeting, and that very issue was raised.
Yep.
And the possibility is being explored that the whole donation, or that the whole system be changed to be a donation.
Yeah.
And then it won't be specified or used in quite the same way. But
Yeah.
it's quite correct. At the moment, RTC donations or contributions, because their membership, are taxable.
Yeah.
There's no refund available on them.
No, not so much taxable, no refund available, because they're a subscription, and along with the subscription, rights are conferred in terms of voting for board, etc. Now, the moment that is an entitlement that comes with the subscription, it's not a donation anymore. It's like belonging to a golf club. Yeah, all right, golf club doesn't advance religion, but the principle's the same. Belonging to a golf club entitles you to elect a board and have a say in proceedings and such like, but it doesn't make it a donation. And RTC's the same. Yes.
We have an issue where we are raising support for somebody who's going to study in America for the ministry, and it's a period of 3 years, which is quite a substantive amount. And people are asking us, if we donate to this, is this tax deductible or not? What would your advice be?
It's harder because we have the same in Bishopdale, and Graham Zudimer is over at the college at the moment, and I imagine if people contributed money through the church books and it was sent off there, does that qualify for a receipt? Oh, yeah. I imagine in the past we've probably said yes, it does. It's a harder one. Yeah, because it's not missionary work. It's actually living expenses. I think it's a hard one.
In the past, because there's always been a limit of $1,500, it hasn't affected it. But because
there is no cap. Because there is no cap on donations anymore, all sorts of things are possible. It's probably one where I wonder whether we should be at some point exploring that with Inland Revenue and asking for a view. But I would suggest probably not, because it's.
I think you're right, Ari, because you're actually giving it direct to that person.
If you're giving it direct to the person, rather, but even if you do it through the church books, all you're doing is disguising it a bit. But I think it's harder than if you're supporting missionaries. If you're supporting missionaries overseas, like the work that Heidi was doing, that's much clearer, and that fits much more comfortably within advancement of religion and such like. Well, somebody studying for a degree in religion is not quite the advancement. They haven't got there yet. So I would suggest not. And if you ask for a formal ruling from Inland Revenue, and they don't give formal rulings nowadays without charging you for it, and it's expensive, it's just going to remain an unclear area, but my suggestion would be that it's not. In the back there.
So you're saying that subscriptions and donations are two separate things?
Yes, they are.
Are non-tax deductible?
Yeah, a subscription. Well, the RTC have come back now. I think in the latest one, they've taken donation off the invoice they send people, so it's back to being a subscription, and you can't claim that, no, because it's a subscription. It is not a donation. If you make over and above the subscription, if you make a donation, that is a donation. Yes, of course it is. But the extent.
OMB quotas, for example, that's a subscription.
Well, no, OMB quotas is paid for by your church. So, but if you donate money, if you donate money to the OMB and you do that through your church giving, and you do that just voluntarily, once again, that's a situation where that would be okay.
Can you just use the microphone?
Yeah, that would be okay if you gave some money voluntarily as an individual through your church to the OMB on top of the quota that the church paid. That would be okay and that would qualify. But RTC, because it is a subscription and it gives you the opportunity to vote for your delegate, that doesn't qualify for the rebate. Trust deed. Yes, sorry.
Just another question on that.
Yep.
Short and mid-term mission projects, you've saved, say, $1,000 to go to the Solomon Islands for
Yeah. Yeah.
Can that money be funneled through the church and tax deductible then? If the church, so you pay the church and the church donates the money to you.
See, that's the creative stuff that I was suggesting you don't want to get into. No. Take up painting and be creative that way. Trust deed. Your church will have a trust deed. You should make it a regular event. Now, I'm not sure, it's a while ago since I did a church visitation, whether it's a question on the church visitation questionnaire. Is it, Dick?
Yes, it is.
The trust deed, the common seal, know where they are, so that they're available if you have to do things in relation to property.
And the trust board needs to meet annually.
Yeah, trust board needs to meet annually. Now, just bear in mind, in many instances, the trust board is the same body as session. It can be, in some instances it is. If you are having a meeting of your trust board and it happens to occur in the middle of your session meeting, you adjourn your session meeting, you convene a meeting of your trust board, minute it separately in a separate document, and then when you're finished, the meeting's concluded and you go back to your session meeting. Make sure you keep it separate, not part of your session minutes. Well, you could say in your session minute you adjourn for the purposes of holding a trust board meeting, but make sure they are entirely separate. They are two separate bodies. It becomes important when you transact property to know who your trustees are. And we had a situation in Bishopdale years ago where, I think it was at the time we bought the second manse for Reverend Flynn. And we scurried around. I just arrived back in Christchurch and I think I'd got the trustees together when we bought the first manse. And I had to get the trustees together again, and I'd been away for about 10 years in the middle. We got the trust board members together again and scratched around and said, who are our trust board members? And the committee manager looked at me, we've had the same lot all the way through. I said, you're joking, the congregation's been there for 20 years. They were all alive still, thank goodness. But they were not all members of Bishopdale Church anymore. So some were in other churches, Reformed churches. But so there's a wee lesson in that in terms of keeping your trust board up to date, relevant, and such like. As I said, some churches name their entire session as trustees. The only difficulty is that the composition of sessions do change quite regularly, and be aware of putting yourself in situations where you need everybody's names. It becomes, hey, there's a nice touchy-feely way about, the whole session's on the trust board, but it can become quite cumbersome. And could get awkward if you've got the whole of session there and some of your trustees are away when you want to do something. Often in the rare event it's needed, the business of the trust board is conducted as session meeting. I've covered that, yep. And to have it minuted as part of your session meeting is simply not good enough. I would recommend a separate minute book. And fortunately, we've been in a situation where we haven't had too many legal challenges, or if any at all, to the things that we do as a church. And I think that's probably because generally in churches there's a lot of goodwill floating around. But society is becoming much more litigious nowadays, so we need to be careful that we minute things properly, that we keep proper records of things, and we just keep the ship tidy. It's called housekeeping. And that brings me to the end of what I was going to cover in the paper, but I'm happy to handle any questions. Derek, how much time have we got? We've got quite a bit of time still.
Yeah, not bad.
All right, okay. Are there any questions that people do want to ask that on situations relating to church administration that might not even be in here? Marco?
Just going back to the overseas stuff, would it be fair to say that if it's for a charitable purpose, that's where you draw the line? For instance, if it's for people studying, it's for their training,
Mm.
charitable purpose, something like Compassionate Catalogue.
Yeah, I think that would be. I think that's the situation. When I talk by convention, we leave things undisturbed, and yeah, if it's for a charitable purpose, yes, I don't think there'll be a huge problem. Dick.
It's for that reason that the National Diaconate Committee suggested that the donations to Compassionate Catalogue be taken via the local church.
Yes, which has the donee status. Yeah, exactly.
Would you see that it's been created?
No, because I think that's the way most of the churches operate, and Inland Revenue is well aware of that. The issues Inland Revenue has with the churches, and they do, is the cash handling, employees and the full-time employee of the church being paid cash out of the offering bag and not being, and money not being banked and then being paid with PAYE deducted. Those are the big issues that Inland Revenue has with the churches, and situations where donations receipts are being written in a very creative fashion with no audit trail back to how much was actually given. Those are the big issues. But there has been in the not-for-profit industry, and I could include churches in there, and government is seeing this, and we're seeing this overseas a lot too, is there's a lot of money spent on very fancy four-wheel drive vehicles and things like that. In the Rotary Club that I belong to, one of our members is a member of the Rotary International Committee, and he said you go to the relatively poor countries in Africa where there's a lot of Oxfam World Vision money and that going in, and the first expenditure item on many of their budgets is a new four-wheel drive Toyota for the local rep. It's sort of, you sort of worry about that a little bit, and they defend themselves on the basis that, well, you need reliable vehicles in order to be able to do your work. But if that's where most of the money's being spent, there isn't much left for others. So just got to be careful in that whole area of vehicles and such like, and that's why, as I said, there's on more than one occasion there's been talk about FBT on not-for-profit organisations and their vehicles.
You mentioned you don't give a hard ruling unless you pay some money.
Oh yeah, if you want a formal ruling nowadays, it's a formal ruling. You apply and they respond and agree to, they have a quick look and give you an estimate on how long it will take and how much it's going to cost. If you want just a view, they'll probably write back to you and give a view, but it's not one by which they would consider themselves necessarily bound.
No, but I'm guessing that's concern that just asking the question is how to count for something.
Oh, it would count for something, and you might get a letter back, but you might get in the letter they might invite you to apply for a formal ruling. But that's the difference. If you want a ruling to which the Commissioner of Inland Revenue would consider herself nowadays, because it is a her, Naomi Ferguson would consider herself to be bound by it, then it's a formal ruling which costs you dollars, and the dollars aren't cheap. It's $210 an hour is the charge out rate for how long they take to come to that ruling. You're determined to get that rebate, aren't you? Yeah.
way around it, but say if your parents were to donate you $1,000, like would that fall under that, and do it at the church, would that fall under that Heidi type sort of agreement?
Oh.
If you're $1,000 and you're saying it's going to be reasonably easy to transfer it to your parents?
I think if they put it to the church without tags of tie, without ties attached as to who it might be allocated to. If it was allocated to a specific person, no. If it was allocated to a project, that would probably be all right. But if it was saying, hey, and that's for my Johnny who's going next week and he's got his gumboots packed, no, this is not going to work.
Because we just recently did a donation to the Delmers over there, working there. Does that then fall under donating to a specific person and a specific building?
No, because that's, well, in the Dharma situation, that's that's for a church as opposed to an individual who's going over to do some volunteer work.
What about Heidi? That's an individual.
Wow.
She worked for an organisation.
Yeah, she worked for an organisation because it was channeled through, help me there Peter, it was channeled through EPIC, isn't it? ELIC, yeah, so yeah, it didn't go into Heidi's bank account direct, it went through ELIC.
Just a clarification, if you get money for, say, the Delmers, you would not be giving it for a stipend, you're actually giving it for the work that they're doing.
Yes, and that's the protection, it's for the project. Now see, and where it's for the project or for a church generally, I think you can split ears there, and at the end of the day, it's a murky area. But as I said, by convention, Inland Revenue has not been uncomfortable with what's happening. But as soon as you try to split the hairs, then it gets difficult to say yes, that's on the right side of the fence, that's on the wrong side of the fence. I think we're giving a good bash, Derek.
Yep.
Hand over to you.
Oh.
Oh. There's the man. He wants to know. Gary?
We're using Xero. Online.
We actually use something, we started off with MYOB first accounts, and now we've gone up to, because first accounts isn't, pretty basic, but now they've gone up to the next level, we've gone up to the next level.
Yeah, and people.
The most important thing though when you're doing that is get one that can go with your bank, that you can transfer the information and it will seamlessly flow over into your document. So whatever you choose, check the bank that the statements from the bank will just flow into it. You don't want to copy the information across. So I can't remember the name of I could find out what we use, but we're with Kiwi Bank and the information just plops into place automatically from the bank without us having to transfer columns over on separate computers. And also on that banking, it's extremely easy now to do the online banking and payments because the treasurer sets off the payments and whoever's the deacon has an account and the emails go to all four of them. And it's first to go and does the double tap and does the second password into it. So the online banking now and payments for that, it's really easy. It's not a time consuming thing. And the email goes to all the deacons and whoever can get to a computer first will go through and clarify what the treasurer has been authorised to pay. So it's quick payments. Most people do it on their phones anyway. Just check your emails on their phone and authorise whatever the treasurer has done.
Yeah. Okay, now there was a question at the back that we.
It's probably quite a complicated question, but who is looking at calling a minister? Let's say he has 6 children. What would be better for the minister? Would it be for us to supply him a house or for him to buy his own house? Or tax?
Well, I think it comes down to the general expectation of churches when they call a minister is they provide him with a house and they provide him with a car. So so he can get on with his work without having to worry about the roof over his head and the fact that he might have to walk to his congregation member to in a moment of need as opposed to driving there. It comes down to what his expectations are and what his circumstances are. you might find a minister turns around and says, well, actually, it's, I had a house in the States and I'm comfortable purchasing the house, so you provide something to me short term and we'll look around and within 3 months we'll buy something.
We had a guy that we were interviewing, and I think he had like 8 children.
Yeah.
But he wanted his own house.
He wanted to buy his own house. Yeah.
So then we have the tax implications of the
Yes. So I've been involved in advising a couple of churches that were facing this situation, and I said, well, in your letter of call, you as a session need to decide what you're going to offer him if you supply the house, what you're going to offer him if he buys his own house. And then he needs to be aware that ordinarily, if there was a church-provided house, he might have an entitlement for working for families, and if he's got 8 kids, he probably has, unless he has a lot of investment income. And he also needs to be aware that if you increase the amount you pay him because he chooses to buy his own house, then some of that working for families entitlement is lost because he's been paid additional salary. And if you lay your cards on the table, there's no issues and you don't have to get creative. And at the end of the day, he can make his own judgment depending on, or he might lose some working for families, but he gets a potential capital gain in owning his own house. There.
Thank you, Harry. I told you wouldn't be disappointed. Does a great job. I've asked Bevan now just to review some books to help us in our deacons' work. Andre's alluded to 1 or 2 of them already that we've found very helpful.
That was the first one. The Deacon's Handbook by Burkov and DeCosta. Must be.
Yeah, yeah. This one here, it's been out of print for 15 years or so, but it's just come back into print, and you can get it. It's a reprint from way back, so you can get it now. I know the hard. I've got a hard copied one, and it's fantastic. But this is
Not my name in it, by any chance?
No, good try. So, I mean, it is a fantastic book, but
There's one here and there's one in the foyer, and they've both got names inside them. So we're expecting them to stay around. I haven't read it. I'm up to about chapter 6. We're reading it as deacons. It is very good and it's full of scripture. And we're benefiting from it. So make sure you get it. It's a classic, like Andre said. There's a good, what looks to be a very useful section at the back with a catalogue of useful texts. I often find myself wondering what the Bible says on a particular topic relevant to diaconal work, and that's a very helpful section. Second book was, I've got 2 other books by Timothy Keller. Sorry.
Whereabouts can you get the Deacons Handbook?
Where can we get it, Derek? Try Amazon. It is Christian Liberty Press, Library Press, Christian's Library Press.
I think if you send me that, I just wonder whether it wouldn't be worthwhile making a bulk purchase of that particular book, because it is classically written from a reformed perspective.
yeah. Although if you, from a church, if you buy in bulk, it all sounds very nice, but then if you buy over a certain limit, then the customs department nab you, and you end up paying GST on it. So if you sorry Harry, you got your ears covered. But if you buy under the threshold, you avoid that. And I know books and things coming in that you order on the internet now is something that the IRD is really starting to clamp down on. Is that right, Ari?
Yeah, we're starting to look at it because there's a lot of internet purchasing, and we need to, well, we need to look at that whole area of trade being an internet buying and how to get their 723s.
Yeah. So, but if anybody wants to order this, if they let me know, and I'll, if you send me an email, I'll send the email back to you of where you can get it. I think that's best that you as churches individually purchase them, then you can come under that threshold. I think the threshold's about $400. Anything over that sends the bells off at the customs.
Is the Elderless Handbook also published now?
Yes, I think it is. Same place.
Another book we were just wondering about was the Office Bearer's Handbook. We've got various online copies floating around, but does anyone know if that's been printed?
Now, they're available online, and I think that's the most convenient way to do it. You can get it via our church's website. There has been talk of update, but I'm not sure about a publication. Maybe somebody else knows. But we go more and more towards this online option.
Yeah, I think the Publications Committee's sort of gone defunct, hasn't it, or doesn't exist anymore. Is that right?
These publications.
Yeah, the Reformed Church one. Yeah.
Not published as a handbook.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah, the Publications Committee used to do it, and then I think Synod took it over. But a lot of the publications have actually gone. They've gone online, like you say.
Timothy Keller is the other writer here. Andre spoke about one of the Ministries of Mercy. It is a very good book. He works through the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan. And just to give you a bit of an idea, various chapter titles: Who is My Neighbour? And it goes through then the character of mercy. And so the parable of the Good Samaritan, it says he took care of him. Very basic, taking care of someone's needs. The motivation for mercy, he took pity on him. Andre was talking about compassion. Another chapter, giving and keeping, certainly gave us a lot to talk about as we discussed it. Another chapter is church and world, and Jesus chooses to speak about the Samaritan. Now, Andre was asking questions about how far do we give for various people. Chapter 6 is conditional and unconditional. It's a good chapter. I might just read a little bit from that. It was quite helpful. He talked about God's grace. His mercy is unconditional in that God calls us with the gospel before we show any interest or desire for him while we are still enemies. But though God's mercy comes without conditions, it does not proceed without conditions. God demands our cooperation and sanctification. And then he goes on to apply this, or to say how we might apply it with our relationships with others. The book's filled with practical examples. Timothy Keller has a lot of experience, but he also draws on historical churches where they've dealt with different things, so it's helpful from that point of view. But one thing he says is on that topic is let mercy limit mercy. We may cut off our aid only if it is unmerciful to continue it. It is unmerciful to bail out a person who needs to feel the full consequence of his own irresponsible behaviour. So, I mean, that's just a couple of comments, but the whole chapter, I'm sure, will be helpful there as well, and the whole book. Timothy Keller. He's a pastor in New York, I believe. He wrote another book called Generous Justice. Put that one second on your list. Maybe I think this one's better just because I read it more recently, but they are both good. Generous Justice is a reflection on God's justice, and it is amazing when you go through it to reflect how much the scriptures talk about God's association with the lowly and his compassion on the widows, those who are facing injustices of any kind. And so the book is written and shows us that it's only through God's grace that we can be motivated to show justice, to be merciful to others. Also by Timothy Keller. Now there is also, we have a single copy here of a protocol that Bishopdale have put together for deacons. It is very helpful. We've talked a couple of times about visiting and the deacons visiting, and there are a couple good points if you did want to take that up and consider it further in there. And I was talking to Louis before, and I think also in the Office Bearer's Handbook it has a good section on diaconal visits. But also it just goes through many things. A lot of it is administration stuff, but it's good to have the right processes in place. But there's also how are we ministering to people themselves. So I think you'll find that helpful. We can, if you could request that, we can certainly circulate it. So just ask someone. Thank you.
That set of protocols put out by Bishopdale, I found it's very good for new deacons, because you can actually, it's the nuts and bolts of how diaconates work and what the expectations of being a deacon is. So I would recommend that each church get a copy of that. I was quite fascinated some time ago. It came up when we instituted as a church that the elders and deacons were going to do that, and Bishopdale at the time were working on it, so we borrowed it off them and used that. And so I continually ask the elders where's their folder of protocols, and they haven't got round to it yet. So we're one up on the elders, but it is a very good resource of the nuts and bolts of hands-on working as a deacon. Now we'll just close this session with singing 482, and then I'll close in prayer and also give thanks for the lunch that's been prepared. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for what we've learnt this morning. We thank you for those who have spoken to us, and we pray that, Lord, we may be able to go back to our churches and apply it in our situations. And Lord, we are thankful that we can come together and have fellowship with other deacons. And Lord, we pray now that you would bless the food that we're about to receive, and may it strengthen us in your service. For we pray it in Jesus' name alone. Amen.